However, the next level you should consider is the idea of getting a cross-platform but native-looking device. So with cross-platform native, a good example of this would be Accelerator by Titanium. I would argue that Titanium is probably the leader in this field at the moment. And let's have a look very quickly about what it is. So what's in the Accelerator Titanium platform? It's basically a way to create mobile application using JavaScript. Now, we should talk about this for a moment. Accelerator and PhoneGap both let you use JavaScript. So at first blush, it sounds like, oh, it's kind of the same programming experience. Well, actually, it's not. And the reason for that is with PhoneGap, you're literally building websites. You're saying, I'm going to take my HTML, I'm going to add some CSS, I'm going to put a little bit of JavaScript in there, and then just package it up. With Accelerator, you happen to be using that same JavaScript programming language, but you're using it in a very, very different way. What you're doing is you're telling it to, in JavaScript, you're saying, give me a native button here and put this text on it. And when somebody clicks on this button, give me this kind of screen or carousel or list or other kind of native component. So it's a very, very different experience developing with Titanium Accelerator. Even if your developer is comfortable using JavaScript, it's going to take them certainly a few days, probably a week or two, to become comfortable and competent developing applications using Accelerator. So it's definitely less of a learning curve, especially for somebody who's been building websites or who's comfortable with JavaScript. It's absolutely less of a learning curve than going all of the way to creating a truly native application, because then you're programming in Objective-C for the iPhone or Java for the Android devices. But it is still a step, and it still takes a little longer to build. The good news, though, is that when you build something in Accelerator, it also works on multiple platforms. So if you want to, you can create a single app in Accelerator that will work both for an iPhone and an Android. So it's really nice to have that benefit. Plus, the programming's a little easier, and the thing that really distinguishes it from PhoneGap is because it uses native components, it looks exactly the same as if you've programmed using a native application. So if you were to look at an application that was built using Titanium Accelerator, you couldn't tell that it wasn't native. So I want to give an example of a particular app that was built using this, because there are fundamentally two strategies, as I mentioned earlier. One is to leverage the capacity to look the same as all other applications in an iPhone or an Android world. And the other is to come up with your own look and feel. And so the first example I want to show here is from a company called Triplingo. What's really interesting about the Triplingo team is that they've built this application that they decided, and I had a long chat with their CTO a little while ago, Pratik Patel, out of Atlanta, and they've created this great application for learning languages online using a mobile application. And they decided very clearly at the start that they wanted to build their own user interface. So this actually, even though this was built using Titanium Accelerator and this could look exactly the same as any other application on, in this case, this is the iPhone version, it actually doesn't. It doesn't look anything like any other iPhone app at all. It's their own distinct look and feel. The good news with that is they don't need to have a different look and feel for Android devices. They just need to create one solid look and feel that matches their brand, and then they provide that to both platforms, to iOS and Android. The downside with this approach, and the one thing you need to be careful of, and I'm seeing more and more companies doing this, is you see popular applications now on mobile devices, they are becoming more and more unique, and they're fitting within the user interface guidelines of the various platforms, but they're very distinct and different from the kind of default implementations that you're seeing from the applications you get from, for example, Apple on the iPhone. The one risk with this strategy that you have to look out for carefully is building your own user interface is a hard thing to do. It's not particularly that hard to kind of throw some buttons up and add some icons. That's fairly straightforward. But actually, to make those buttons and icons easily discoverable, meaningful, so that users of phones will expect them to work in a way that's somewhat similar to other applications they're used to working with, That's actually the part that's hard. So it's important to make sure that if you do go the route of kind of forswearing the default look and feel for iOS or Android, make sure that you've got a designer who really understands mobile UX and really takes the time to do some paper prototyping and do mock-ups and work with users to make sure that you're actually creating a usable interface, because that's much more effort than you might otherwise expect. So Triplingo is one example. Another example I want to show real quickly is actually an RSS reader. So this is just an application designed to allow you to look at snippets of news. Interesting thing here, this looks exactly like a mobile. This looks exactly like a native application. It's using exactly the look and feel and the style that you'd expect for an iOS device. So it's important to realize the big takeaway and what differentiates Accelerator from PhoneGap is that with Accelerator, what you're building can look like it's a native app, even though it isn't. Which brings us quite nicely onto native apps.